Good afternoon once again, and welcome to this week's Improving Compliance Time Changes webinar. Now, during our webinar today, everyone is muted, so please, as always, if you have any questions, any concerns during this call, please use the questions area of the control panel, at which point you can go in there, type in a quick question, and we will be looking at those questions and addressing those at the appropriate time in our call today. Now, as a reminder, these webinars are designed to provide everyone just the basic knowledge needed to basically go in there and master the Blueforce system. So these webinars will continue on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Central until further notice, and we'll have different topics every week. This week, of course, will be on time changes. But as always, these webinars are also available for you to view after they are completed. That way, if you ever need to refer back to something I say or want to review with your team, you can always go out to YouTube, just go out there to YouTube and look for these webinars, as well as the documentation is provided out on the Google Drive site, which is a public site out there where I'll put these documents. In both cases, they're also available on the ISS Gateway site. And for the purpose of this documentation, I went ahead and put the links here. So if you go back later and download the document, the actual slides here, you'll be able to see the actual information as relates to these particular pieces of documentation. So in today's webinar, we're going to be covering a couple of key areas. First, we're going to talk about what is considered a time change. Time change is really a huge portion of the discussions as it relates to compliance, because obviously you go in there, you have to touch time, and changes do occur from time to time. So first thing will be, what is a time change? Secondly, we're going to be talking about how are we doing. Basically, what is the top 10 list out there? I'll cover that as, what are the top 10 districts, companies around the country, and detail those here on the screen shortly. We'll also go through basic time change issues, and then I'll show you some solutions to correct those issues. And then lastly, we're going to recap on how to improve the time change scores. So a lot to cover. We'll probably go the full hour today, but these are just kind of the agenda for today's webinar. So let's get started. What exactly is considered a time change when you refer to the metrics and the scoring that we have put together? Well, first off, a time change is any adjustment that has been made to an original time punch that was initially made by the employee after he or she had successfully made the punch via one of our 4 acceptable time collection methods. So to sum that up, really, basically it's one of our employees punched in via phone-in, via the Walter, via the web punch, or via the mobile punch. And once they punched in, somebody, whether it be an editor, a submitter, or an approver, or someone on this phone call, went into the system and edited that punch. So basically we went there and made a change to that employee's punch. That is a time change. Now, we all know as Blueforce users, we have the ultimate responsibility to maintain our payroll records. For this reason, we all have the ability to change employee time records in Blueforce, but must ensure that the records accurately reflect the time actually worked. So we understand that there's opportunities out there that occasionally we may have to go and do a time change because we have to make sure the employees pay correctly, or it's more so the time is accurately reported. However, a time change is a time change, and we want to try to eliminate going in there and doing any unnecessary time changes. And that's kind of the purpose of today's call, is showing you and identifying those time change scenarios and how to provide you a solution or quote-unquote workaround to those scenarios. Now, one of the most common lawsuits, and I'll bring it up, is the wage and hour lawsuit. It's where any of our employees can go in there and claim that we have not paid them accurately. More specifically, we have not paid them for all the hours worked, or they were not paid for time that they were owed as far as overtime is concerned. Now, when we have a wage and hour lawsuit, the employer, us, can be found liable, may be required to be paid damages, including back pay, attorney fees, and civil or criminal penalties under both federal and state laws. Now, for this, I'm speaking kind of in general. We have companies in Canada as well. For those that are on the call, obviously welcome to this call, but those should be the same kind of penalties that will be applied on the Canadian side. Now, in the U.S., we have something called the Fair Labor and Standards Act, and that defines an employer as any person acting directly or indirectly in the interest of an employer in relation to the employee. So, bottom line, anybody on this phone call that is making a change to anybody's time or inaccurately reporting the employee's time falls under this umbrella. So, since we are all representatives of ISS, we all fall under this umbrella should a lawsuit come against us, come against ISS in general. So, want to stress the importance of not making time changes is very critical here. Now, and to that, we want to minimize, obviously, any time change record changes. Bottom line, I think I've said over the last several webinars, over several weeks, that we want to make sure the employees punch in and punch out, and they maintain their own time records. So bottom line, they make sure that they punch in, they're responsible for their own time. Now, any supervisors that are out there can always record the time for the employee, and that's perfectly fine, that's legal, but they should be closely monitoring those hours. And when I talk about supervisors getting involved and recording time punches for employees, that is only reference to the the mobile punch app, where the supervisor can do a group punch to actually punch in a group of employees. So from that perspective, supervisors can maintain punches via that group punch option. Now, we should hold employees accountable, obviously, to the timekeeping policies and procedures we have in place, and we have to make sure that we enforce that there's no off-the-clock working, and we have to make sure that the employees actually go to lunch and have the opportunity to take their lunch breaks. These two are big scenarios in our company right now that are occurring, where we allow employees to come in, go straight to work, not punch in, and then come back later and punch in, which if you go let them do that, then you have to do a time change to correct their time later. And secondly, lunches. If they're entitled to lunch, make sure they get to lunch. That's just a standard rule of thumb. And if they don't take a lunch, then you have to go in there and make time changes, and it gets a little messy. But bottom line, if they are not on the clock, and just a side note from the risk and safety group, if they're on the clock and they're not on the clock, and they get hurt, then we have other scenarios that come down the pipe from that. So I won't go down into that, but you can only imagine what kind of issues it can have from the risk management group and safety. And obviously, when changes are made to a time record, we want to keep the original record and create a modified record. So basically what that basically means, if we go in there and make any changes to that, we have something in Blueforce called a audit. And the audit utility is always running. So if you ever go in there and make any changes, any adjustments to any records, it is consistently tagging your name to the different records that are in place. So we can actually go in there and see, who made the change, when the change was made, when things were occurring. And for those that have Hubble access, you can actually go in there to the time change metrics, and there's a nice little metric there that shows you a listing of all the time changes that were made, who made the change, when the change was made, what the change was, how many minutes were deducted or added to a time record. All that's right there. So all this is public knowledge, is always visible. So to that point, please do not go in there and make any time changes unless it's warranted. So let's go into a little fast before we go into the different options. I'm going to do a different little avenue this time. Before I go through the different time change scenarios, let's go through and see who are the top 10 companies or areas around the country, around the U.S. and Canada, that are actually at the top of the pack. So look in here, you'll see that these are the scores, and you'll see a lot of them have perfect 4.0 scores. And like I mentioned on the last webinars, is a 4.0 score is what we want to strive to get. A 4.0 means you're perfect, means that you've have no time changes whatsoever. So all these locations here are doing phenomenal. I actually left 3 of our subs on the list, which is positions 5, 6, and 7. Although they're not our direct employees, they are using our system, and they're actually doing better in most cases than a lot of our sites around the country. So that says that our subs understand the process. They understand that they need to use this as well, just like everybody else. These are our top 10 areas. Now, of the 300 ISS districts that are currently set up right now across U.S. and Canada, 86 of those districts have a perfect 4.0 score, so that is phenomenal. And then we have 98 districts that have a score between 3.5 and 3.99, which is also a huge task and a huge goal that we've hit here. So that's awesome. In all, we have 61% of our districts at a 3.5 or higher, which means that 65% are compliant. But we need to identify the reasons why the other percentages, and in general, why we are making time changes. Time changes need to be addressed, and we need to figure out why we're making them. There's a lot of things that the Blueforce can do for us, and that's kind of the purpose of today's call. As I go through this, I'll hit on some topics and some issues that we're having, and some basic things we can do to prevent time changes from occurring. Now, to that, I do urge you that you reach out to not only myself, but to the whole entire ePay team, either myself, Tiandra, obviously, Beth, or Jade. We're all happy to help you to go through these. And all of us have reached out to all the locations and provided some type of contact with you. So that way you have a point of contact and someone you can work with directly on these issues. So let's go through some of the time change issues that we experience in ISS today. The first one is a very basic one, is adding employee time. Now, commonly, that basically means that we're adding to an employee's time typically to match the scheduled or the budgeted number of hours that employee is possibly due for. What that basically means is we do not want to add no more hours than what the actual employee worked. So if we're grossing up hours to match a scheduled shift time, that is prohibited. What that basically means is if an employee is typically working 7:30 to 4 p.m., but today leaves at 3:30, we do not go in there and add an extra 30 minutes. It seems kind of, basic thought process, but that is happening quite often and quite a bit in the company. If the employee punches in at a certain time, for example, the example here is 10:41 p.m., then that is the time that's going to be used to calculate the work time. This is why it's important that we have the employee punch in and punch out. Now let me show you some examples of what not to do. So for this example, this is something we do not want to do, and these are actual examples that are in Blueforce right now. These are older examples because I didn't want to point anything current, but these are older examples, but these are in Blueforce right now. So in this case, an employee was scheduled to work until 11:30, but finished work early and clocked out at 11:08. Now, if you look here on this particular screen, the 11:08 is shown here. Now, what that's telling you, it's in green. Oh, sorry, let me go back to the previous screen, sorry. What that is telling you is that color is in green. That's letting you know that the particular time frame or time frame of 23:08 is actually a valid time. The employee actually recorded that on his or her phone-in punch. So that phone-in punch is a valid punch. It's sitting there. It's something that we see. Now, if you look at the line right above it, the 23:30, the 23:30 line is in orange. That's telling you that a time change, something has occurred. A change has occurred to the original time. Now, in saying that, that becomes a problem now because we have actually added 22 minutes of time to this particular employee's time record. So not only are we docking them for, you're getting docked essentially on the metric because we did a time change, we're probably doing something that is not correct. We've gone in there now and added, like I said, 22 minutes to this employee's time. Now, if the employee was off the clock and you asked them to go back and do some additional work, they should go back and clock in. We want to make sure that their time is on the clock when they're actually working. And once again, this is all from the audit trail, which I'll be referring to a lot through today's call. But this is just letting you know that this audit trail is showing you these entries. Now, it does not matter if this is a cost plus account or not. Now, bottom line, we do understand that the employees typically who work at cost plus account, their time is going to be billable. Typically, the management at those sites are going to pay for that customer to, that customer is going to pay for us to clean their building. They're going to pay for that labor. That's all understandable, but the customer can always come back and say, we want to audit your records. And this has actually happened, quite a few times last year. And in saying that, what happened to us is that we then Either A, we're not able to provide accurate records. You know, we bill them for 300 hours this week, and our records show that was 270 hours. Well, that looks a little pretty bad. So we've lost a lot of business because we've misrepresented this labor. And obviously, make the employees stay the full shift if they expect to be paid for the full shift. If they clock out early, then so be it. They clocked out early. But bottom line, this adding time to an employee record leads to excessive labor dollars. So for example, if I take the minimum wage of $8.25 an hour and we added 22 minutes every day, 5 days a week for just one employee, that extra employee would make an extra $15.13 extra per employee. And this is just for one employee. If this was 10 employees there, it's an easy $150 plus that we're adding to our labor there at our job site. The number two issue we've seen is kind of the reverse of that. We're actually shorting the employee time. Now, before I go into shorting an employee, let me also add that if we're adding time in the system, you're actually obviously paying an employee more than what they're actually due for. So that's why we say no more. Where on the short end of the stick here, we say no less. So if the employee is paid, worked 8 hours, then they should get paid for 8 hours. Reducing hours to stay within budget or to avoid OT is prohibited. And speaking on behalf of the ePay team, we have seen that quite often and recently as well, where employees are purposely being reduced so that the budget looks good, that if we reduce them here 15 minutes here, then they won't get overtime. Shaving hours when they actually worked it is illegal and prohibited. If the employee works 8.5 hours, then he or she should get paid for 8.5 hours, even if he or she is supposed to work only an 8-hour shift. This is where, as a supervisor, as a manager, we intervene to basically discipline the employee and let them know they don't do it again. We have to be vocal with these employees. It is illegal to short pay an employee in this manner, and I want to address that there's no favors or alternate forms of payment allowed here. So in saying that, we don't go back and say, oh, by the way, if you work overtime, don't clock in for that, and I'll give you a gift card at the end of the week, because that's happened. Or don't say what, stay a little late for me. We won't put it in the system, but I'll take care of you later. I'll give you an extra day off, and that's a favor. So we can't do that. And also, don't make them sign any paperwork okaying this, because that too is illegal. Even if the employee were to consent to it, by us doing that, that is still illegal and would not hold up in a court situation. These scenarios right here of shorting employee time is a Department of Labor field day, and I tell you, they sniff blood there, they're going to jump for it. And I guarantee that if one of our offices somewhere in the U.S. or even in Canada for that matter, if let's say in the U.S., this example, gets audited by the Department of Labor, they then have full reign and the ability to say, you know what, I know this may have happened on the West Coast, but I want to also check over on the East Coast, what's going on the East Coast, so give me some examples there. Or let me go up in the Midwest and give me some examples there, because they're going to want to now investigate straight across the board. It's not just one location, it's the entire company that's under the spectrum at that point. So here are some examples of what not to do. So this example, this time card is always going to show you that the employee there had a punch of 2203 in orange. Now, once again, for those that are familiar with the different color coding, the orange is just letting you know that we have a change that has been made to the employee's time. Okay, so that's what the orange tells you on the audit trail. If you look down at the bottom of the screen, the audit trail itself, it will show you that the original punch was at 2217, and it's a white background. It's a clean color. That clean white background is letting you know that the employee actually punched in via the Walter time clock, and then for some reason, had a time change of 14 minutes. So someone reduced their time by 14 minutes. Now, right under my blurb here, I'm going to circle it here. In this little area, there is, I'm just coloring it right there, but that little area there is where you would actually see who made that change. That is listed there in Blueforce, and a lot of you did not know that. And one of the things to let you know about this is if you go to the time card screen, and I'll show you a couple of views here in a little bit, but if you go to the time card screen over to the actual time card itself, and click on the little black arrow that's right to the left, right to the right of the word time, view details. Sorry. If you click on that little black arrow, it'll give you an option to view audit, and you can see all the audit trail for that particular time record in question, of which this bottom screen pops up. It shows you all the punches listed, and then right in this little area, it'll show you exactly who did it and when they did it. So this is public knowledge, so there's no secrets here. I say there's not a magician with something up their sleeve. Everyone has access to seeing this right now. And I'll show you some screenshots of that time card detail momentarily. So another example of what not to do. Notice the first punch. First off, all of these have been consistently changed. You see the nice orange color in the audit trail here, but the first one at the very top of the list shows a 242 punch. That is a reduction of the original punch of 3:26 a.m. So right there, we've reduced 44 minutes from this employee's time. Why? Who knows? Without asking the supervisor, the manager, whoever the editor, submitter, or approver here, as to what happened. And one more example, another example of what not to do. Time card above shows Mr. Steele here working 2200, leaving at 6:15. Notice the orange color. The orange color says that someone already modified that punch. But lo and behold, if I look at the actual audit detail record, he actually clocked in without no problem. Someone went in there and corrected his out punch, so the correct hours reason code comes into play. And then for some reason, someone came up here and changed his in punch to 2200. So maybe he came in early, and that's sometimes a valid point to make a time change. But in reality, if the employee came in early, corrective action is the way we need to go. Don't go in there and start editing his punches every day. Get on them and say, hey, you can't punch in more than 7 minutes before the start of the shift. Keep in mind that the rounding rules is applied straight across the board, across the country. So if they clock in we're supposed to be here at 4 p.m. and they clock in at 3:30, then it's going to show at 3:30 in the system. If they clock in at 3:56 and they're supposed to be at 4, then the system just rounds it up to 4 o'clock. So just keep in mind that rounding rule is always going to round to that quarter out, the nearest quarter hour. Third issue, another issue that we constantly get is reducing an employee's out time to account for an unpaid lunch break. Now, we do understand that employees occasionally, from time to time, work through lunch because they're busy. We can't afford for them to go to lunch, and that's probably not the right mindset to take, because by law, everyone is due. I would say not everyone straight across the board, but depending on the number of hours worked, they're due a lunch break, at least a 30-minute break. So to that point, it is important that we free them up if they're entitled to lunch breaks. Make sure they go to lunch and force them to go to lunch. Don't just sit there and say, all right, we'll let it pass, we'll let it pass. There are some settings on Blueforce where we can actually set that will actually kick off lunch reminders for the employee. What that basically means is if they try to go to lunch and we have them punch out for lunch, the system won't let them punch back in until that 30-minute window has come through, or that hour window, wherever the threshold is going to be. That works well for those employees that actually clock out for lunch, and actually clock out at the term. It's actually start meal break and then come back and end their meal break. Now, if we're doing an automatic lunch deduction, then that should be a no-brainer. We don't want to go back and mess with punches later. Send the employees to lunch. Make sure they get that 30-minute, the hour, whatever time frame is needed for their lunch break. Now, the next part of that as well is and once again, that's reducing the employee punch to account for an unpaid lunch break. Now, keep that in mind. At no time is it acceptable to reduce an employee's out time to account for an unpaid lunch break. We have to work around the system. We have to, and it's not really working around the system, is we're actually treating the employee correctly and making sure they go to lunch. But it's crucial that we preserve the employee's original punches. We want the system to automatically show that they were at a job site from time A to time B. And if we need to, if for some reason they didn't go to lunch and they have an automatic lunch deduction, the system, you can always go back and add lunch, and I'll reference that here in a little bit. But on the flip side, if they you don't have an automatic lunch deduction, and the employee did go to lunch, but then for some reason didn't punch out for lunch, then you can use the split function to correct that scenario. So like, for example, they punched in at 8 a.m. and they clocked out at 4 p.m. It's an 8-hour shift, but during the day they took a 30-minute lunch, just didn't make it over to the clock, or didn't make it to a time collection device to actually record their lunch. Then you can use the split function to go out there and split out that 30-minute unpaid lunch. So that is a function I'll point out here a little bit later as well on our call. So another example of what not to do in this scenario, a time card view is going to reflect that the time change has been made to the timeout. Notice the orange color once again. So the audit detail record is going to confirm this, that you'll see here that Dale Reed, and this particular employee back on February the 28th, sorry, the 29th, clocked out at 7:01. But it's an orange. That orange is letting you know, once again, that a change was made. Now the audit trail is actually going to show you the full audit trail. If you notice, he actually clocked in at he actually clocked out that day at 7:30. 7:30 is noted down here at the bottom, being the original time entry. And as you go up into the most current entry, it's showing at 7:01 being the most recent, which basically means that, oh, you know, someone went out there and actually changed that punch. So it basically took away 29 minutes of time for him. Now, only thing I can attribute this to being is that it was probably a lunch punch, that someone wanted to shave off those 30 minutes. Now, when we look at the time, let's say worst scenario, this employee is actually on the clock till 7:30, and let's say he actually punched out at 7:30, but let's say at 7:20, before he clocked out, he slipped and fell, or he had a accident in a company vehicle or something. Well, if we ever come back to his time record, if we don't go into the audit trail, we're going to show 7:01. So then that probably, from an insurance standpoint, gets us in trouble, because it's going to say he wasn't on the company's time, he wasn't punched in. Sorry, can't help you. And that becomes a big issue, because now we have to prove otherwise. And the Department of Labor, obviously, from a Department of Labor's perspective, that's 29 minutes were taken away from the employee. That could have either A, nowhere do we say it's lunch, for one, but maybe there was 29 minutes that would affected his overtime at the end of the week. Well, that becomes a big talking point as well there. So you can see there's a lot of bad things that can come up by making changes to employee punches. And these examples that I'm bringing up, that things that could happen, have actually happened in the last 6-8 months to maybe even a year. So these things have happened in and around the company. And you'll see this example here, another one, 30-minute lunch deduction. You see the out punch is actually 16:30. That was how it was entered in the system. The yellow punches are letting you know that that was a manually entered punch. So if you ever see any yellows in the system, that means that you or someone that has access to the employee's time card made a manual entry. So in this case, a manual entry was made at 16:30 and then reduced to 1600, which we can only assume was for a lunch deduction. So whenever you have a scenario with lunches, and I'll just point out, if you ever have a situation where an employee maybe works through lunch, so like this particular example, he started at 8, worked through until 4:30, but did not punch out for lunch, we do not want to do what it shows here. We do not want to make that 30-minute deduction on their actual time record. The proper way, as I mentioned earlier, is to treat it with a split. And that split is the same function for those that were on the call last week when I talked about manual punches. I talked about the split there. Same functionality. The only major difference here is you're actually going to code 30 minutes or an hour, whatever the lunch period is, to a specific rate type of lunch. And that makes that lunch entry as unpaid in the system. That way the employee doesn't get paid for that 30-minute time or whatever lunch interval it is. So for creating a split, it's a two-step process. It entails basically taking the employee's original punch and breaking it out into 3 separate series of punches. Now we're going to also then go in there and edit the rate type, which is basically the middle punch, which I refer to as the middle punch, and I'll show you more. I'll give you a little more detail behind this momentarily, and call that middle punch the lunch punch. So essentially what I mean there is, if that employee worked 8 to 4:30, we can go in there and say the employee worked from 8 to 12, create that as one split punch. Then create a second or the middle punch from 12 to 12:30, saying that is the lunch, 30-minute lunch. And then create the third series of punches, which is the 12:30 to 4:30 punch. This is the end of the employee's day. Now the benefit here, once again, the split does not edit the original employee's punches. All we're doing as part of the split is reallocating or redistributing those hours as needed. So all we're doing is taking the total hours and telling the system, I need 30 of it to go to lunch, or I need 4 of it to go to this job, 30 minutes to go to this lunch, and then 4 hours to go to another job. So we're just basically redistributing that those hours. That's all we're doing. Now, the automatic meal deduction is the way to go in most cases. I would urge you that if you have employees that are always going to get lunch taken out of their time, they're always supposed to go to lunch, and you're not a stickler for them being gone exactly 30 minutes, you know they're going to get deducted 30 minutes, so they go when they need to go, then use the auto meal deduction. Have the system automatically do that for you. If you need their punches recorded, you need to know specifically that they were gone 27 minutes or they were gone 39 minutes for lunch, then have them punch out and punch in. But it should be one or the other. We need to have this automatically set up. Now, if you don't have lunches at your job site, if it's a paid lunch, they work through that. You don't have to worry about lunches, then so be it. We don't have to worry about this. But I want to bring this up and give you the options there should you need to. So, to do a split, this is done in essence to recreate the employee's workday. So, the way I'm showing it is, in most cases, you want to actually show when the employee went to lunch. You want to have it reflect accurately on the actual time card and time sheet, so you actually know that they actually went to lunch at a certain time of day. Now, if a certain time of day is not critical to you, then you could easily do the split in a two-step process where you do 2 series of punches and just have the lunch appear at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. But bottom line, you do not mess with their out punch, okay? Or you don't mess with their in punch. So you have the ability to go ahead and set this up any way, shape, form. But to get this started, and let me point this out before I go any further here. Notice the screenshot, the little black arrow that I was talking about here next to View Details. There's an option called View Audit, and that's where you're actually going to go and see the audit trail if you ever want to dive into someone's audits to see what happened on that time record. This is a good step-by-step process for those that are doing submittings, the submitters and the approvers. If you look at and have any questions about someone's time and you're wondering why is all this in different colors, what's going on here, go into the View Audit and you'll be pleasantly surprised. I'm sort of shocked, I guess might be the word, is how many changes are actually occurring. Although you only see one entry in and out on the actual time card and even on the time sheet, the View Audit will show you all the time changes. And I bring that point up because we've had a lot of discussion, I guess a good word, with a lot of smart field users in that the time change scores aren't correct because I only show one entry in the time card. Well, there is a time change occurring, a lot of time changes occurring in the background. And that's where the audit comes into play. You can see everything that you may see in Hubble. You can also see it obviously in Blueforce, where you can actually see all the time changes that have occurred. But real quick, back to the split here. From the time card view, you're going to click on the little black arrow, you're going to pick on Split Time Card. That is the first option on that list for you. Now when you click on Split Time Card there, you'll be able to now see a different view. We can actually see your original hours. So the original punches are actually up here, 8. Actually, this is actually an incorrect screenshot. I actually tinkered a little bit, but this should actually be 4:30 right here. So it'll be 8 to 4:30 up at the top, with a total of 8.5 hours showing on your before side. But this after section is kind of where you're going to actually now go and make the split. So at this point, I can now take my 8.5 hours and come down to the bottom of the screen and make my split as shown here. So I can say the employee worked 4 hours at this job, and then after those 4 hours, he took a 30-minute lunch, and then he went back to that same job, which is my main office job, and worked an additional 4 hours. So in total, this equals the 8.5 that we are looking for. But the critical piece is this lunch line. This lunch line now says that employee worked lunch for 30 minutes. That lunch tells the system that's unpaid. It notes it in the system. It notes it on the timesheet for you. but it's unpaid. So a total day here, the employee will get paid for 8 hours. Now this lunch line, just so you can keep in mind, is easy. It's just a quick drop down from the rate type side of the column there, on the rate type column. Now once you're done here, you go down at the bottom of the screen, hit save, and it'll actually create those 3 lines for you as part of the time card. But keep in mind, the in punch and the out punch did not go anywhere. The in and out are still preserved. You just redistributed or moved around those hours. So the way this works is the system, and let me go ahead and erase my drawings here. The system's going to take the original in punch, go in and add the 4 hours here. Take those 4 hours, create a punch now from 8 to 12 on the time card line. Then from 12 o'clock on, it's going to take the next line, which is 30-minute lunch, create 30 minutes, add it to that 12 o'clock punch, which now takes you to 12:30, creates that second line under lunch, and then that third line will be created from 12:30 to 4 hours later, which is 4:30, and get you your total 8.5 hours. So the system automatically redistributes that time for you, doesn't count against you. It's a good thing to do because it can get real messy if you're going in there and just trying to change the original entry, and re-add time manually in the system. That is not the way this is done. You actually go in here, take the original punches, and use the split to get you what you need. So a lot can be said. You can quickly turn around your metrics by just complying with this one entry of using splits all the time. That'll turn around your score immediately. The fourth issue that we've seen a lot also, and I want to address to everyone, so please, this probably affect a lot of you out there. Needlessly adjusting an employee's in and out time to the quarter hour. What that basically means, an employee punches out at 5:02 p.m. and we've seen a lot of edits that go in, users going in the system and changing that punch to 5 o'clock. Now you may be asking, okay, so what's wrong with that? He's supposed to work till 5 o'clock. Well, first of all, keep in mind we have a rounding rule. That rounding rule rounds the quarter hour all the time, the in punch and the out punch. So that 5:02 punch I was referring to becomes 5 o'clock automatically. There is no need to go in there and edit a punch. So rounding rules are always already in place and they'll always take care of this for you. The rounding rules also are used company-wide. So don't think we're just picking on a specific job. This is straight across the board. The whole entire company adopted this policy probably 2.5 years ago when we first started ePay. It's been when we first started working with ePay, and then we first went live shortly thereafter with our first companies, we adopted this rule. So straight across the board, everyone is rounding. The standard rounding rule, once again, is the nearest quarter hour, so the nearest 15 minutes. And it's applied both to the in and out. And those are some examples there, so you can kind of see the 4:56 becomes a 5 p.m., the 11:05 p.m. punch becomes 11. So this is straight across the board. We're not cheating employees out of any time because it's both to their favor and it can be just our favor. It has to be in their favor as well. So to that, if the employee were to punch in late, say they're supposed to be there at 5 p.m., but they punched in at 5:02, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. They're going to get those extra 2 minutes. It's going to round back to 5 o'clock. So you can see it's in both their favor and our favor. So that's the way the Department of Labor says we can use rounding. If it's not always in our favor, but we also take into consideration the employee as well. Now, continuing with this, there is no need to make any of these unnecessary time edits because every time you go in there and touch a time punch, you've edited that employee's punch, you have now wasted your time. You have wasted the metric now because now the metric is now showing incorrectly because now it's counting against you. So please, bottom line, let the system do the rounding. You let the employee punch in and punch out. You let the system do the rounding and apply the time appropriately. And issue number 5, zeroing out the time and then manually adding the same time hours back in. So what it basically means is, you know what, there's a function, that's a cool function in the system called zero out time card. I'm just going to go in there and wipe out this employee's time. I'm going to go in there and key it in myself. Well, that's not a good thing. At no time is it acceptable to zero out an employee's time card and then manually add it back in. First off, I'm just kind of against you, and you've done it twice to yourself. First off, you've done a time change because you've zeroed out punches. An employee's punched in and employee's punched out. It recorded 7 hours. But you decided I'm going to zero it out, and I'm going to go in there and manually enter another entry. Well, sometimes this happens because an employee during that 7-hour time frame may work 3 different jobs, and you figured, oh, it's easier if I go in there and just enter 3 lines of time. Well, first off, you counted yourself 1 time against you because you did a time change, and then 3 times against you because you did a manual entry. So you can see right there, it's not a good way of doing it. It is crucial that you always preserve, and I can't say this enough. I know I'm sounding like a record player just going off and on and on and on here, but it's crucial that you preserve the employee's original punches. We do understand that employees work full days. We understand that they don't always clock in and out, and because they forget, or they just simply don't clock into other jobs, or simply, like I said, forget to punch in and punch out, or they accidentally double punch. But these are not valid reasons to zero out punches. If they have a punch in there with an in and out punch that's already paired, we should actually go in there and take that punch and either split it out. We can go in there and work with those punches. We shouldn't actually go in there and just zero them out and just to go create new manual entered punches. So let's point that out real quick. If an employee works a full day and doesn't remember to punch in to the other jobs, there are a couple things we can do. First thing is manually split the time card, like I showed you a little while ago. Manually splitting the time card, once again, is just a process of taking that time, moving it around, reallocating it, or readjusting it accordingly to multiple jobs as needed. Just like we did with the lunch punch, we can do here with multiple jobs. This is, once again, this is perfectly legal. This is not going to be something you're going to be penalized against. So please use splits when needed. And here you're going to focus on straight hours. You're going to use straight hours to go in there and move time. If you want to say employee worked 8 hours, I need 2 hours to go to job A. I need 2 hours to go to job B. I need 30 minutes to go to lunch. And then I need an hour and a half to go to job C. You can do that without altering the employee's in or out punch. So once again, the employee is still responsible for punching in and punching out. They can punch in at 6 p.m. in this example. They can punch out at 10 p.m. for a total of 4 hours. And then you can go in there as an editor, submitter, or approver and do the split as needed. And you can split it out as shown there, 1 hour, 1 hour, and 2 hours. So once again, to split a time card, you're going to hit that black arrow right on the far left-hand side of the employee's time card. And then you're going to go to number 2 there and click on Split Time Card. Now, by clicking on Split Time Card there, you now get the ability to maneuver yourself and change those hours as needed. So in this example, I actually split out my 13 hours and 29 minutes accordingly through 4 different jobs. And this particular example didn't have a lunch. And I will point out to you that if you have an automatic lunch rule already set for this job, you don't have to go in there and include the lunch into your split. The system will know that from the timesheet view, it'll automatically go in there and split out that, well, I want to say, maybe that's not the right word, but the system will actually go out there and take out that 30-minute deduction for lunch. And I want to point out that the automatic lunch rule is based on a threshold. So if we say that, you know, an employee working an 8-hour shift is entitled to lunch, we actually put a threshold in there, and that says that, you know, after a certain amount of hours, the employee is eligible for lunch. That being said, in most cases, we have a 6-hour threshold that says that, you know, if an employee works after 6 hours, they're entitled to go to have a lunch break, and that's typically based on a state rule. And in most cases across the board, it's a 6-hour threshold that's set up. I believe it's California. I don't want to be quoted on that, but I think it's California and maybe a handful of other states, maybe like Utah. There's a few states out there that have a 5.5-hour threshold. So we have to set that up accordingly to that state. But bottom line, after that threshold is met, the system is automatically going to deduct that lunch if there is a lunch rule set on that job. So when it comes into a scenario like this down below, and let's say after 6 hours, the employee is entitled to a lunch. When my example, notice here we work 5 hours. The 6-hour threshold has not been met yet. So then the system will say, all right, he works 3 hours on this job, which now we're at 8. So at some point on this job, this is the job that's going to get applied that lunch rule. So the question always becomes is, why did this job get the lunch and not this other job? Well, it's because we have the lunch rules that are in place that say that after a certain amount of period, after employee works so long, this is where the lunch rules are going to hit. So that's kind of how it works. It goes like in a hierarchy, kind of, when that threshold hits, whatever job the employee is working on at that particular time is where that lunch is going to get applied. So that's kind of the split. I mean, the split is something I mentioned last week and I mentioned again this week, so you can understand the importance of using the split correctly. Now, if this is a job that the employee is always working, and I just want to briefly mention this, if the employee is always working these same jobs and he always just clocks in and always just clocks out, that is the perfect 100% scenario for auto split. The auto split, if you remember from last week, mentions that the employee can be set up on a kind of what I refer to as a work plan, and the employee can actually automatically get the time split to the proper jobs if they always work the consistent schedule or work plan here. If they always work the same jobs, they always work the same amount of time on those jobs, you can create what's called an auto split. So I don't have a slide for that in here, but I just want to mention that as an option as well. Save yourself some time and get the employee on an auto split instead, if that's the case. If the employee simply forgets to punch in or punch out, then we're just going to go into that missed punch and correct their punch. So if you look here, this is a time card of an employee that forgot to punch out. So if I look here, he punched in at 8:59, but simply did not punch out. So to make that correction or to make that fix, it's simply done. Just go back into that Timecard view, click on Edit Timecard, and go in there and fix the missing punch, whether it be an in or out. Just make sure you put in the right date and make sure you put in the right out time or in time, depending on what it is. Put the reason code for this entry. This is a required field. This is where we want to know, why did the employee not clock in? Was it a employee's fault? Were they having a system issue? Maybe the clock wasn't working. What was the reason why they didn't clock in? And then click on Save, and you're done. This is a manual entry because we're going in there and manually entering a time punch, but this is the proper way of going in there and making sure the employee did not have an issue. And of course, we have this scenario where an employee simply punches in and out twice in a row by accident. Occasionally, it is, it's common, unfortunately, and an employee's not paying attention at the clock. I've seen it myself when employees too busy talking, they go into the clock, they put their finger, they turn around, they put the number, they turn around, and during this process they're hitting punch in, not paying attention to see if there was an acknowledgement on the screen. They turn back around, it happens so quick they say, you know what, I'm going to punch in again because I want to make sure I punched in, or punch out twice. Regardless, it causes a scenario of double punches in the system. Now, the easiest way to do this is you remove the extra punch line by zeroing out, using that function called Zero Out Selected Time Cards. So for the time card screen, you're going to pick an option called Zero Out Selected Time Cards, in which you then go in there, basically fix one punch and get rid of the other one. Typically, if there's a double punch, there's one punch that's sitting out there by itself, that's the one you want to zero out. This is the way to do it. This is the one that you're going to be able, this is the way you can use Zero Out Selected Time Cards. Kind of from a legal standpoint. You can use Zero Out Selected Time Cards to wipe out time when there's a scenario like this where an employee has recorded a punch in error. Now I will say, and real quick, if I go through here, you'll see there's some of the ways of doing it. Go to the time card line, select your time card, click on Zero Out Selected Time Cards, enter your comment. In this case, it doesn't give you a reason code, it gives you something called comment. Just put in the reason why you're putting it in there, just type a little blurb, and then just set save, and the system will save your entry and remove that extra punch from the system. This is the only acceptable way for using Zero Out Selected Time Cards. Now, I will say that one of the new functions that we have for those that use the Walter devices, this is kind of typical where we have the double punches a lot more. We are rolling out a function on this clock called IntelliPunch. And for those that are on the call from the San Antonio office, we're using them kind of, I would say, as a guinea pig, but you're one of the first ones to use the system, use this IntelliPunch, as well as here at our corporate office. And the IntelliPunch actually will drive what the next punch should be for you. So when the employee goes to the clock, the first option they'll get is to punch in, and that's the only button they'll see on the screen. They'll click to clock in. If we have lunch, the need for them to punch out for lunch or punch back in from lunch, those will be the next functions that'll be available for them on the clock. It'll be actually, when they go back to the clock, the system will say, you already punched in, your next step is lunch. If we don't have lunches there, they just need to clock out, then the clock will be very simple for them. The employee goes back to the clock to punch out for the day. There's only one little button on the screen that says punch out, and they're done for the day. So it kind of drives the process here to let them know what state they are in, so that way they're not needing to, go in there and accidentally create a double punch by accident. So let's kind of, in wrapping up our call today, let's review what are some of the things you can do to improve your time change scores. So I know I talked a lot about 5 major issues that we have, but bottom line, there are a couple things that are the standard that you can do immediately to improve your time change scores. First off, everybody here, let's create a culture of honesty and train your managers and supervisors on the importance of keeping that honesty. So we talk about favoritism. We hear about that quite a bit, where the supervisor always takes care of this employee, lets them clock out early, lets them go this. I'm going to take care of your time. We need to make sure that the time is actually honest. Let's make sure the employee is actually keeping track of their own time by going to the clock, going to the phone, etc., and punching out or punching on their own. Paid per Blueforce. Make sure they punch in, make sure they punch out. What's in Blueforce is what they're going to get paid. And stress that to the employees. I guarantee you that it only takes one time for that employee not to get paid correctly, and they'll figure it out that they need how serious we are about this. I know I don't urge you to do interims, but force the employee to punch in and punch out. And sometimes learning the hard way is sometimes the best way of making sure that going forward we correct that habit. And discipline. Make sure that we're consistently on these employees. Make sure we provide them the corrective action, but make them understand that if they don't record time or they falsely record time, that there's a recourse for doing so. So Blueforce users, and that's all of us on this phone call, we will not add time to the employee's time card to match scheduled or budgeted hours. We will not shorten an employee's time to match scheduled or budgeted hours. We will not reduce an employee's out time to account for an unpaid lunch break. We are not, and we will not needlessly adjust an employee's in or out time to the quarter hour, because remember, the rounding rules already do this. And we will not zero out time and then manually add the same hours back into the timesheet. It defeats the purpose, and it's basically just a waste of time. So to sum it up, once again, as we always talk at the end of the calls, I want to make sure everyone understands how you get support going forward. So if there's any questions, any concerns, obviously first contact ISS IT support, put in a help desk or call the help desk line that's mentioned there. And once again, when you download these documents after the call, you'll be able to go in there and pull this information out and go back and refer to this. But always put a help desk ticket. It's always important that you do that, because right now I can guarantee I have tons of emails asking for assistance, and they could have probably been solved by now if they had just put a help desk ticket. So help desk ticket is the way. And secondly, if for some reason it's after hours or if it deals with the Walter time clock, always call ePay support directly. There's a phone number and email address there for you as well to do that contact. So just to wrap up, I want to say once again thank you for joining us today on our Time Change webinar. This webinar will happen again on Thursday at 2 p.m. Central again. And then next week we'll have a different topic. I believe next week's topic is on rate changes and stuff about adjusting rates and maintaining rates in Blueforce. So we'll talk about that as part of our ongoing Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series webinars. So until next time, thank you for joining me, and we'll catch you on our next webinar.